Good morning, virtual universe. It's Zach. Welcome to week 2 of my poetry and revolutionary blog. Feels a little bit like the ego has expanded, and my extreme unironic narcissism means week 2 of me talking into a camera just for my own personal pleasure. So, why poetry? I decided that I needed to do a poetry blog for several reasons. One, I absolutely adore poetry, and while I'm not worried about its survival, I am worried about its thrival. It is a medium that is a little obtuse and a little bit hard to find the place in, and yet once you have the place in the poetry, it can be life-changing and amazing and this powerful experience like a spell or an incantation. But when you first are given a book of poetry when you're in high school, it just looks like a bunch of words laid out randomly almost on a page. And in that random order of words, there is a life and a performance and a meter and a cadence. Most of that can't be heard because your teacher doesn't know how to teach it to you, and most people don't know how to read it in there. So poetry has to be performed for it to have life. Poetry has to have someone speak it out for it to keep going. Some of the greatest poems to survive are poems that had great calligraphies or great tapestries based off of them. And if you don't have someone to either write it down in a way that is pictorial that a museum can hold, or a living body to speak it out, the poem loses its power, and a part of the emotional experience of human history is lost to going into real history, into the academics, into the pages of boringness. So I want to read some poetry. When the police raided Occupy Wall Street and Zuccotti Park for the second time, they pulled a full pull Fahrenheit 451, and they trashed the People's Library. Books were thrown into fires, books were thrown into dumpsters, and somehow, in all the chaos that ensued that night, the book of people's poetry, all the poems that had been written by the people at the park for the Occupy Wall Street movement, survived. And this is a binder that is, a glorified three-ring binder with napkin poems and matchbook poems and all the different ways that people have scrawled out their feelings and scrawled out their emotions and scrawled out what this moment means and what this moment in time is holding emotionally for all of us. That survived. And it's wrapped in duct tape, and it's a priceless heirloom for the entire movement. And I wanted to make sure that there was more priceless heirlooms, a video record of some of the poems that have brought us to this point in revolution, some of the poems that will guide us through this point in the revolution. My first poem, or actually maybe the only poem I'm going to do today, is by a poet named Frank O'Hara. And I love Frank O'Hara. He was in the 40s, 50s, and the early 60s. And he was a queen and a half. He was the freak of the week, 1959. He walked the streets in drag. He was hysterical. He wrote poems about loving men. He was absolutely brilliant and so beyond ahead of his time that when I first asked my high school poetry teacher, well, what about this guy named Frank O'Hara? He looked at me terrified, like, who told you that name? And please don't read that book, and God, I hope that's not in our public library. And when I went to college, they had him in one of our courses, and he was grand in this sort of flippancy of poetry, as he wrote poems, spur of the moment, read them out loud, decided they were crap, and threw them away. And the bulk of his work ended up on the floors of bars in crumpled napkins because he didn't think it was important enough to keep. And, fans of his literally picked up these crumpled napkin poems and tried to make him read them later and said, this is brilliant, it changed my life. And he's like, oh, that was a one-time happening. That was pure crap. I really love Frank O'Hara's death story the most because he was sunning himself on a beach on Fire Island in 1966, and a dune buggy randomly hopped a dune and crushed him to death. And if I'm going to die a terrible, random, horrible, violent death, it'd be pretty cute if it was something just out of the blue, like being crushed by a dune buggy while I'm sunning myself. I'm personally still writing the Crazy Train Through Breakupville, and this poem is called Meditations in an Emergency, and it's sort of his crazy train breakup poem also. And as I read it, I want you to remember that it's 1957. Am I to become profligate as if I were a blonde? Or religious as if I were French? Each time my heart is broken, it makes me feel more adventurous, and how the same names keep reoccurring on an interminable list. One of these days, there'll be nothing left with which to venture forth. Why should I share you? Why don't you get rid of someone else for a change? I am the least difficult of men. All I want is boundless love. Even the trees understand me. Good heavens, I lie underneath them too. I'm just like a pile of leaves. However, I have never clogged myself with praises of the pastoral life, nor with the nostalgia of an innocent past of perverted acts and pastures. No, one need never leave the confines of New York to get all the greenery one wishes. I can't even enjoy a blade of grass unless I know there's a subway handy, or a record store, or some other sign that people do not totally regret life. It is more important to affirm the least sincere. The clouds get enough praise as it is, and even they continue to pass. Do they know what they're missing? Yeah, they do. My eyes are vague blue like the sky and change all the time. They're indiscriminate but fleeting, enticing and disloyal, so that no one trusts me. I am always looking away, or again at something after it has given me up. This makes me restless, and that makes me unhappy, but I cannot keep them still. If only I had gray or green, black, brown, or yellow eyes, I would stay at home and do something. It's not that I'm curious. On the contrary, I am bored. But it is my duty to be attentive. I am needed by things as the sky must be above the earth, and lately, so great has their anxiety been that I can spare myself little sleep. Now there is only one man I like to kiss when he is unshaven. Oh, heterosexuality, you are inexorably approaching. You are inexorably approaching. Just remember that this dude had to live like he was mostly in the closet. Oh, heterosexuality, you are inexorably approaching. How best to discourage her? Saint Serapion, I wrap myself in the robes of your whiteness, which is like midnight in Dostoevsky. How am I to become a legend, my dear? I've tried love, but that hides you in the bosom of another. And I am always springing forth from it like the lotus, the ecstasy of always bursting forth, but one must not be distracted by it, or like a hyacinth, to keep the filth of life away. Yes, there, even in the heart, where the filth is pumped in, and slanders and pollutes, terminates, I will my will, though I may become famous for the mystery of vacancy in that department. It is easy to be beautiful, but it is difficult to appear so. I admire you for the trap you've set. It's like a final chapter no one reads because the plot is over. I've got to get out of here. I choose a piece of shawl and my dirtiest suntan. I'll be back. I'll reemerge, defeated from the valley. You don't want me to go where you go, so I go where you don't want me to be. It's only afternoon and there's a lot ahead. There won't be any mail downstairs. Turning, I spit in the lock and the knob turns. One of the things that's happened over and over again is poetry has been completely redefined by each new generation of poems, and as I read that poem I realized why Frank O'Hara is considered so revolutionary. Is he basically just made a series of paragraphs and called them a poem. And in that series of paragraphs, there's this life that explains to us what it was like to be a 1957-year-old fag going through a breakup. I hope that I see you every single week and that we do a lot more poetry together, and hope the revolution gets better.